Uh, so this is sort of fun. We're
Are
doing a
we
new
here now?
thing.
Are we
We're
here?
here now, Lily.
Oh, great.
We're here now,
And now.
also now. So I'm just as people are joining, I'm just going to say welcome and then to everyone. Thanks for coming to this talk and chant and with myself and Lily, who's one of my closest friends. And so Lily and I talk about practice all the time, but we just do it on FaceTime or on the phone and not for everybody. And so it's kind of great to maybe dive in a little bit with everybody here about some of the things that I think are certainly on my mind, and then I've found are on the minds of many in the community. So hi Jeanette, nice to see you. Um, so I think what we'll do is, before I really formally introduce Lily and we get started, we're going to, hi Paul, hi Annie. Um, I'm going to chant to just ground us in the practice. And then we'll come back and Lily and I we'll talk. And then we'll open it up to you all to post questions in the chat. So that's how it's going to go. So, all right. Let me do my thing that I need to do. Little technical something.
Maybe folks can tell us where they're viewing from.
Yeah. All right. Let's Om, because that's what we do. Gonna chant Om Dum Durgaye Namaha, which is the Bija mantra for Durga, Dum. Om Dum Durgaye Namaha. And bring her energy here to us. Call her forth in all her fierce love. Om Dum Durgaye Namaha. 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 Om Oh, hey,
Hey.
Lily's back. Um, so I think most of you here might know Lily Cushman, but in case you don't, um, I sort of like, in a way, my new name for her is like the mantra whisperer because um, I have a little story about that. Because uh, so I've been chanting for 20 something years, maybe 25 now, something like that. And my sister has known my sister's not in our chant world. She's got her own path, and she knows I've been chanting for a long time. She's heard me chant. She's heard my recordings. She used to put her kids to bed with Krishnadas's recordings when they were young, and then Lily wrote this really great article about chanting only a few years ago, really, right? And my sister read that article, and she was like, "Oh, now I finally know what to do." So that, and then I was like, "Lily, you're like the whisperer for like you're like the interpreter to everyone about like what the heck we're doing." Because I thought I'd described it, but clearly I hadn't. And then that led to Lily writing this really great book, a little bit of mantras that maybe she'll read a little from, which will be really lovely. And it's really a great resource for talking about mantra practice. We have these fancy banners, people. It's so much fun. So you can see Lily's website,
Fancy.
her book. We're getting so fancy. Jeanette says she wants to read that article. Maybe we'll find somebody. Where is it on your
It's on
website?
my website, yeah, on the blog. Yeah, it's something that I wrote for Garrison Institute about a weekend that Krishnadas does there a couple times a year. So, yeah.
It's a great article and a great book. And Lily's done so many other. Lily does everything, and she does it really well, which is pretty annoying when you're good friends with her because you're just like, yeah, sure, okay, fine. So Lily's like a beautiful singer and an amazing musician, and she's like a longtime yoga practitioner. Founded a yoga school. She's smart, beautiful, also really great at design. I mean, I could go on, but you get the picture. So
But like a total dick.
yeah, I like it. Except not. You're totally fantastic. But anyway, so the question I want to start with
Yeah.
is like the way that I want to just talk a little bit about sort of how this practice that we do, mostly chanting, but we also, some of us are meditators and yoga practitioners, but mostly I want to focus on mantra and chanting and like sort of the ways in which practice can and our approach to practice really can help us or hinder us. So can
Yeah.
you sort of talk a little bit about that from your
Yeah.
personal experience and your thoughts on it and observations?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like a lot of what's going to be said today is really a continuation of a conversation that you and I have been having for years, which is, really just trying to understand like how in living a life that's really contained by practice and supported by practice that you know what actually happens there and what are the like pitfalls that certainly like speaking from experience like we fall into even though we have these kind of amazing aspirations and are doing all these things. So yeah, I think it's a very important conversation to have in an ongoing way with all of our people because like with each of our different tendencies, like I might get stuck in a different hole than somebody else does, but when we get stuck in those places, it can be helpful for others who maybe haven't encountered those things yet. So, I mean, I think for myself, like so many people, I came to practice because I had suffered a tremendous amount and was done with that. I was done. I was like, Okay, don't really agree with like the basic premise of like what it means to be a person. We're going to come and have these bodies and we're going to do all these things and we're going to have ice cream and funny things, but also, you know, there's just like a tremendous amount of difficulty in being a person, and you know, this duality of having both incredibly like positive, beautiful, inspirational experiences and then losing those things or not finding them or encountering great difficulty or suffering a lot or, you know, all the different kinds of pain, whether that's physical or emotional or otherwise. So I think for a long time, I really wanted practice to just change the rules altogether and make it so like that shit didn't happen anymore. Like, oh, well, if I'm really great and I do my practice and I'm really committed and I do 3 hours a day of da 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 da, like bad things won't happen to me. And yeah, that hasn't worked for me yet. And I think like there is still a part of me because of being raised in the West and being brought up in a kind of like a rewards based culture of like if you're a good little girl you will get the prize, is still something that's like ingrained on a very foundational level to me. And so I think even for long time practitioners, it's good to kind of go back to basics of like having a practice is not something that's going to be a magic wand. It doesn't mean that like rough things don't happen. It doesn't suddenly make the world a fair place. Especially this past year with COVID, we've seen so much injustice. You know, the veil has been lifted in really important ways, and it's been terrifying to see. And so I think it's good to just remember like what does practice do and what doesn't it do, because we can spend a lot of time practicing and fighting to have it do something that it actually will never do. And enlightenment is kind of this promise of like, oh, freedom from the basic setup here. You'll find me catching a lot like I don't agree with the setup here. I think it's kind of crappy. Don't really know what it's all about. All these big unanswered things that we ultimately have to grapple with our whole lives. So I do think that practice, though, offers a profound amount of agency. It's just maybe not where we think it's going to be.
Yeah.
You can use practice to try to control your mind, to like squeeze it into a thing, to not ever feel anxious or not ever feel depressed or I'm not going to think about that thing. You sure can try, but I will say from experience, it just really didn't work, certainly for me and most everybody I talk with. But I have really learned how to let go and learn how to be with these unanswered questions and just kind of, instead of trying to figure things out in my head, have this like much bigger ability to be with things as they are. So it's kind of an interesting like back door in, because ultimately I think, and I've certainly seen this after like the like 10 years with Brooklyn Yoga School and working with a lot of students, I think it's hard to like understand what practice is really doing. And, you know, the type A's kind of come in and it's like, great, we're going to do the thing and I'm going to feel great and da 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 da, or I'm going to chant this and I'm going to feel really high and I'm not going to be depressed today, or, you know, think about how I haven't had a hug from anybody in 9 months, you know, like these things. But that's not true. It's not true. And if you rely on those, you can actually kind of set yourself up for more suffering. So I kind of think of practice as a way to not suffer unnecessarily. That there is still this kind of baseline of experience in life that is just shit. It is shit no matter how you scramble it. Like, and these people who say like, oh, if only you had you know, been more grateful or you'd had a better attitude, it wouldn't hurt so much. Like, I don't think that's true. I think, as like the Buddha said, like the baseline of life is that there is suffering. And that's also what informs the beauty and joy, the impermanence, all of that makes us taste the ice cream when we have it. So the tools that come out of practice allow us to kind of handle suffering in a way that's not, I think, more damaging than it needs to be. Like, we don't shame ourselves. We don't get lost in, like, let's say if something terrible is happening to us, thinking this is the only thing that's ever going to happen. This is it for me. I will never feel anything else. Or, you know, uh, getting into a lot of like spirals of self hatred, all of that. So we kind of build this pretty amazing toolkit. And I think so much of the conversations that you and I had when we were both simultaneously getting divorced and having like pretty profound, just very high amounts of pain, emotional pain. And like, when we reach that point, when we're really like getting crushed and life is bringing us to our knees, it's pretty natural to like question why we have come there. And lots of walks around like Cobble Hill and Park Slope of us talking about like, why are we here? Why is this so hard still? And like, how can we endure this pain in a way that's at least forward leading, that it doesn't just like destroy us altogether?
Wow. Yeah. Um, it sort of makes me, you know, I think for me when I think about that, it's like practice is this really refuge for us. And when I think about refuge, um, it's like the ground. It's like home base. It's like where I come, that I can come back into my body. I can connect to spirit, to the divine, to, for me it's Siddhima, for I can really connect to something greater than myself, especially when things are super hard, right? If I have a bigger container kind of thing, right? That's sort of what, for me, spiritual practice um, gives me, right? And
Yeah.
so I think um, I think also it's easy though, like you were saying, it's really easy to sort of misinterpret and like have the wrong aim with the practice. And I think actually some of what you're saying now makes me want to talk about um, spiritual bypassing and like what that is, and what, how we've seen it in our community, how it's really easy to do in a lot of ways if you're not aware of it as a thing. And like, I want to say over the years before it was even had a name, spiritual bypassing, right? Lily and I were always like talking, and people would be sort of giving teachings that we were like, what even is this? And like,
Yeah.
like you're not going to chant for a car, and like, I don't know. And like that whole like abundance, just manifest abundance and then the money will come. It's your attitude why you don't have money. It's like, for much of this country and much of the world, it's not the attitude of the personal, of that one person, right? Like that's not what's going on, right? This is structural and systemic, and there's a lot of oppression,
Yeah.
and there are realities to why some people have money and others don't, right? And so it's easy to get caught up in like kind of magical thinking. If I do this practice, if I align my mind this way, if I only think positive thoughts. I used to hate, I'm sorry for those of you who love these, but I always hated affirmations, like hated them. They came around in like the 90s, I want to say. And I'm old. And so like
Yeah.
I was like, no, because I'm from New York, and like, no, I just No.
Mm-mm.
But oddly, I will say, and conversely, metta practice, which is kind of like high level affirmation, right? Where I'm wishing myself well and I'm wishing others well, resonated incredibly deeply. I find that really freeing and grounding and a beautiful way to connect with humanity, with myself, with my own humanity, with others. So I think, I just want you to talk about sort of what you're seeing as spiritual bypassing, how we can catch it and like call it what it is, catch it, call it out, and like not do it ourselves, like
Yeah.
really get grounded in what's true and bring the two together. So it's not like you and I were talking about, like, oh, it's all one.
Right.
Yes, okay, in absolute reality, but we're here. We're here.
We're here in relative reality.
Yeah, we're all.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so spiritual bypass, I think, is a super juicy topic. And basically, it's this term that was kind of coined in the mid 80s that is a mechanism, it's kind of a psychological mechanism of using something that feels good, in this case, like a spiritual practice, like, say, going to a kirtan or something, um, in order to not feel something negative. And so you see this a few different ways, but it's in a kind of short term way, it can be like a simple coping mechanism, if somebody's like in trauma. But in a long term way, it's just something that I think, just because of the way that kind of yoga entered the Western sphere, how it was kind of hyper commercialized, it just like warped into all of these different places. And there's been a fair amount of misinterpretation about, you know, what these teachings really are. And so this kind of bypass is, it's like rooted in our psychology, I think, ultimately as a survival mechanism. Because, but it's kind of, like our biology has evolved in such a way that, like, we, we're not like out on the plains hunting, needing to like have the same kind of radar for danger, and so on and so forth. But here, it's like it's a psychological way to kind of protect ourselves from feeling badly. But when that gets kind of put into a culture that is, like I mentioned before, kind of this like a culture that is very rewards based, but it's also a culture that doesn't leave a lot of room for negative experiences. Like, we're socially, it's pretty unacceptable to express sorrow or anger or these things. So our culture is pretty ripe to then like put these practices into play that are just going to bypass that altogether. It was kind of fine with a lot of people because, like, yeah, if you're grateful, then you don't have to feel X, Y, and Z. And it becomes this long-term way to really get away from ourselves. So instead of using the practice to learn about our psyches and who we are and what we are, we're using it to actually disconnect from who we are and what we are. And so it's tricky because on the outside it looks the same. Da, 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 looks exactly the same. It really, only like a very like skilled like psychologist or teacher who knows the arc of someone's life maybe can point it out, or you yourself can understand the motivation. And a lot of times it's hard to even be honest with our own bypass because we don't want to admit to ourselves, like, okay, yeah, am I chanting right now because I'm dedicated to the well-being of all? sentient beings, or do I kind of just hate myself right now and need to crawl out of my skin, and this is the better way to feel? Like, that's a hard truth. So it's interesting because I think as we settle into practice and learn how to sit with ourselves more and build up this capacity to be real with what we feel and not so judgmental about like what our minds do that really is out of our own control, like we can start to have an honest look at like, oh, there are times I'm really running from myself. And I do think that a lot of the ways that the spiritual bypassing, like it's not as bad as like going and doing some other activities that are probably a lot more negative for you ultimately. But are you using it to just like check out? Because you could do that with like a whole bunch of things. And yeah, chanting's not as bad. But ultimately, you're not with you. And I think it allows certain behaviors that we just, don't take responsibility for. So it can also hurt other people.
Right. And actually, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about, that there are teachers out there who I feel like are pretty manipulative, um, and they use this as like a. To me, it feels like it's being used as a manipulative technique, like a way to get me to join their whatever the hell they want me to join, or buy
Yeah.
whatever they want me to buy, or you know what I mean? And I just like that aspect of it. I mean, I know that's not new. Like, people are manipulative everywhere. There are bad actors everywhere. Like, I know it's not
Yeah.
like, oh, we're in the spiritual world and suddenly everything's clean. But
Mm-hmm.
there is a way in which, maybe because it's my world, I take personal affront, like I get so angry when I see it,
Yeah.
and when it's just such bullshit, and it's being peddled as, this is going to help you, right? This is going to help you evolve. This is going to help you, become, get rid of your blocks about money. I know I keep talking about money. Maybe I want a little money. Just kidding. Um, but like that's that, you know what
Yeah.
I mean? And so
Yeah.
I don't know. Can you just, what's your take on all that? And how do you deal with that? Like, do you just ignore it? Do you call it out? Do you like, what do you think?
Well, I think that, yeah, it's very, I think just because there's like a spiritual community and people who are seeking other ways of being, like that doesn't mean we're not still people and we're not still running all the same programs that we are, whether we're like in university, like getting our master's in business, or music camp over here as a teenager. Like, there's certain things that are just, I think, part of the human experience. And so, in the realm of kind of spiritual matters, I think it does feel a lot more loaded to me because there's just so much. Because I believe that it's actually like a pathway to suffer less, it does create like more of a reaction in me to see people misusing that for other means. And some people do that knowingly, some people do it really unknowingly. I think it's very difficult to like kind of pluck some, like these lineages where these teachings come from are out of a totally different culture. And I hear these like stories of Westerners like talking to the Dalai Lama, and he gets confused at certain questions because he's like, we don't have that concept in the East. We don't have certain things that are just really normal here. So, is it surprising to me that like the United States just like took yoga and then mindfulness and meditation and just like commercialized the shit out of it? Not surprising. That's what we do with everything. That's kind of the thing. And yes, it's very, very upsetting to me to see someone abuse something that feels pretty sacred to me, for either just personal gain or power or, like sexual abuse, like all of these things. And in the arena of our own happiness and trying to suffer less, I think people really are profoundly vulnerable in these areas because, for someone who has been through a lot, there is, if life has like cut you down over and over and you don't have a lot of confidence in yourself, or, you may not have the ability to really like discern if a teacher is in integrity or not. And then you get preyed on and you're desperate for something that's going to help you. And maybe you end up with someone who's, not empowering you as a like independent, thinking, discerning human, but as just someone who's going to either give them money or power. It's pretty brutal to see. And, I think that's why we have to have these conversations. I think it's also why we have to understand spiritual bypass in ourselves, because it's not something that like they have and I don't have. It's something that we all have. It's just like, the nature of mind to like have aversion towards things that are hard and have attachment towards things that are good. And the more we can learn about that, then we can like have compassion for someone who that is extremely out of balance with, that maybe is with some teacher that's not doing well by them, because they don't have the tools to be any other way with it. So I think more and more there are some good resources for these kinds of things, but yeah, I mean, I always had some kind of like hard and fast rules, but they were rooted in these things. Like when I was doing teacher trainings, was just like simple things of like, when you're teaching yoga, like don't take on a fake voice that suddenly you're like very this, like, no, we're not becoming somebody else. This is not a big show. And it's not genuine practice if you're still just a jackass, like when you're in line at the post office. There's not like a time when you're on and a time when you're off and you can then just be like a dick to everybody. Like, so, we've got to be real about this stuff and like look at the shadows in our own hearts, so we can have some compassion for understanding how other people are caught in those same things. But one of the interesting stories that you and I talked about a lot was around Ram Dass and what I kind of put in the category of spiritual bypass. So I don't know if you want to tell this story, if you want me to start.
Go ahead, start. Tell it.
Okay, so many of you know this teacher Ram Dass wrote this book, Be Here Now, which I love this. Sharon Salzberg recently was like, yeah, be here now. That's fine when we like what now is, but what if we don't like now? It's like, meh, meh. So Ram Dass is this, very, very well-known teacher. And many years ago, he had a stroke. And at that time, he had already been teaching. He was already this like huge kind of cultural force that had informed a lot of the 60s and the psychedelics, all these different communities. So he has this stroke that leaves him, leaves him so altered that he has terrible aphasia where he can barely speak, he can only use like one side of his body, and he spends the rest of his life dependent on the care of others and in a wheelchair. And so for him, as someone who had a long time practice, this like very interesting thing happened, which is the way he made sense of that. And he's written about this a lot. That's why we know about it. And and talked about how he accepted the stroke as though it was the grace of his guru. And he used this term that his guru, Maharaji or Neem Karoli Baba, stroked him. And he taught about that for a long time, for years, in fact. And the context for this, and we haven't talked at all about the guru, but it's kind of like, whether you think of it like the guru or the universe at large, it's like he kind of had, it was his way of accepting what had happened was his path. And it wasn't like he was suddenly not on the path, but that his guru was there with him. And this was his kind of medicine, so to speak. So fast forward some years later, he makes a trip to India, which is like a big deal because he's like in a wheelchair, and the access there is like nothing if you're not able-bodied. And he sees Siddhima, and Siddhima is the woman who Maharaji kind of left in charge of her temples. She's really kind of the one who would like continued to interpret his teachings. So many of like Maharaji's students would come to her as a kind of continuation of their relationship to him. So you take the rest of the story from here.
Well, so I was actually there at that time by accident. I wasn't in Kenchi by accident, but I was not. Ram Dass came with a lot of people, and I wasn't there because of Ram Dass. There were a lot of people that came because they were with him and his group, right? But I happened to be there with Nina, actually, and we were there with our kids, and we just happened to sort of pick the same time. And so what Siddhima, who is my guru, who is my teacher, my spiritual mother, she asked him, she said, when they were in darshan, which is like he was sitting with her, we call it darshan, it's in the presence of a saint, right? And she looked at him and she said, do you really think Maharaji would do that to you? Do you really think he would do that to you, that he would give you a stroke? Maharaji loved you. And he stopped and he was like his mind was blown, and he was like, no, Maharaji wouldn't do that to me, actually. And so the grace for him, he realized the grace was the way in which he saw the stroke and was relating to the stroke as an opportunity, as a way to shift and change, which he did very much. He was a very, very different person before stroke and after stroke. Before the stroke, he was he was a great teacher, but he was a lot more egotistical and a lot more full of himself and sure of himself, and not nearly as open and soft. And when after the stroke, he softened and he was humbled. He really became so much more loving and available in a real way to people. And he continued to build, that continued to, I want to say, build as he got older and older. That quality got deeper and juicier and richer, and he evolved in that direction. And it was because the grace was from Maharaji, and because of all his years of practice and teachings, that he was able to see the stroke in that way and relate to it in that way, which is the thing that like Sharon Salzberg always talks about, is it's how you relate to your practice. It's how you relate to what you're doing in life that is the key, right? It's how you see it. So you may, and that actually reminds me of this story that I remember being with Siddhima, and she pointed out, we were sitting with her and there were Indians in the room. It was Indians and Westerners together, right? Sometimes we had separate, so there could be translation, and sometimes we were all just packed in together. And this was an all packed in together situation. And she pointed out to us, the Westerners, very specifically this woman who was a devotee, and longtime devotee of Maharaji, and whose son had died recently, her adult son. And she said, her son died. Like, this is a true devotee. Her son died, and she never lost faith in Maharaji. She never stopped believing in Maharaji. She never
Yeah.
like questioned. And I was like, whoa. Because for me, I'm like, if my child died, would I be at the littlest thing goes wrong in my life. And I'm like, Maharaji and Ma, you don't love me. You've forgotten about me. Who are, this is not, I'm wrong. Everything's wrong. Like I'm just a
Mm-hmm.
whining brat, um, so that reminds me of that
Yeah.
kind of like faith and love um, and that ability to see really clearly, like to really see. And I think, you know, some people have been commenting that, Jeanette asked about if we would talk about cultural appropriation. And I think some of the things you've said can lead us there now. And then I think Kathleen also is said she said she tuned in, and the first person she thought of is Lama Suryadas, and how he's still a consultant and teaching. And so, why is he around women? And that's a really good question, and that's a really good thing to point out because yeah, he's doing what men have done for like millennia now. Powerful men, right? They're in a position of power and they take advantage, right? And they're running all kinds of programs that they have and they're manipulating and they're harming. And they're doing it in the name of this is right, this is not new. And they're doing it in this he's doing it in the name of spirituality, like, oh, I'm so spiritual, right? But like it's the same story. Andrew Cuomo, right, our governor in New York, just got called
Yeah.
out for sexual harassment, and he's like, oh no, I was trying to mentor her. Oh please, so like that's the you like, oh no, I'm just teaching you, you just need to let like it's total bullshit and it's manipulative, and we need to be able to say that's what that is, and you're covering it in like spirituality or being a mentor or whatever the hell you're saying, whatever lie you're using, that you're telling yourself, that you're telling everybody else, so that you can to enable you to continue being
Yeah.
a manipulator, right? And if we don't say, which we didn't back in the day, like a lot of us, we were like, oh, it's just the way it is, right? But now people are saying, and thank God, right? And
Yeah.
so it's both and, you're a spiritual practitioner and you're calling out the bullshit, right? It's like that's part of our path, right, Lily? That's part of our path is like we do our practice and we say this is bullshit or this is harmful or this is wrong. And so I'm liking when I'm seeing people like some of our colleagues and some people in the community calling it out. When they do, I'm really appreciative because it takes guts too to say it and to call it out. I think, especially for
Yeah.
those who have been harmed, those people I am always bowing down to because that's really hard. Um, so I want to talk a little bit about cultural appropriation, right? And I made a little notes because I think it's good to talk about. I think it's important because it wasn't something that was in my consciousness when I first started doing this practice, right? So I started, like I said, like 25 years ago now, and I went to India and I met Siddhima and I, fell in love, and all I wanted was to do what she said, and I wanted to feel more of that feeling that I felt when I was in the room with her, right? I would do anything to feel that way. And so whatever she said to do, I did. So she said, sing the Hanuman Chalisa,
Yeah.
like do these practices, do these prayers, right? And they're all from another culture, right? And, not my own. And I think a lot of us, I want to say from the West tend to like we're running a little bit. Like maybe we were abused in our religion, or maybe we saw the hypocrisy in our own religions here, whether it's Christianity or Judaism, and that led us to go away from our organized religion and go to the East, right? Like there's a grand tradition of Jewish people becoming Buddhists, right? The Jubus. And like, all the founders of Insight Meditation Society are like Jewish culturally. Um, so like there's this way in which we went to the East seeking answers, seeking that core, that mystical, that mysticism, right? And then, but and it's tricky because it is a practice from another culture, and there's this way in which, like you already talked about, it being commodified here in the West, right? The practice of yoga, and I think lately I've been questioning myself a lot around this practice that's not from America, right? This practice that I do of chanting mantras in another language from another culture. And I'm aware of being respectful of the culture and honoring it. Like I understand that part, but I think sometimes like, you know, I sing kirtan, I'm chanting like just even for myself, like I'm like am I doing this right? Am I doing it in a way that's honoring the tradition?
Mhm.
Am I using this in a way that's like sort of like you and I, when we were talking earlier, talked about sort of a new form of colonialism, right? Where you're taking from something from another culture, using it to your own benefit and not honoring that culture. So I just maybe you can talk about what cultural appropriation is, how we again tend to fall into it, especially those of us doing these practices from the East, and how we can sort of become aware and not do that, right? Like obviously we're not going to just abandon a practice that's given us so much, but how do we do it in a way that's sort of respectful and aligned with integrity?
Yeah. Well, you just brought up like 10 things I want to talk about.
Yeah, I know. It's like we could go on all night here.
Yeah, which is why whenever we actually have these conversations privately, they're like 4 hours long.
They're pretty epic.
Before I answer the question specifically about cultural appropriation, I do just want to acknowledge like what you were saying about some of the comments that are coming in, and like bringing up Lama Surya Das and Cuomo and kind of the Me Too movement, which over the last few years has also swept through spiritual communities. That, of course, has happened in the past as well at different times. And so I think what feels important to say about that is that the way I frame practice that I think is so important is going back to a word I used earlier in the conversation, which is agency. And ultimately, I think that when we're doing practices that kind of fit well with us and we're doing them like correctly, because there's easy ways to just kind of like not get the right instruction and then you're doing the thing and you're not doing it right. But if we're really like wholeheartedly doing it and doing it in a way that's like correct, like the pronunciation is right and our motivation is there and we're being skillful with it, it is ultimately about cultivating more and more agency with ourselves. And I think initially it's really kind of this like getting to know ourselves process, which is very foreign in our culture outside of, let's say, a therapeutic environment. And that as we learn about ourselves, we also just learn about the human condition because there's so much that is just universal in us, greed and, delusion and allure, like all of these different things that we work with. But I think as we cultivate more and more of a relationship with ourselves, inherent in that is cultivation of this kind of sensibility of I too have a right to exist here and I deserve basic human rights. I deserve to be happy. I deserve to not only respect myself, but be respected. It's a long list. And that as we cultivate that for ourselves, the reality is it starts to inform the way we relate to the world as well. And what we expect in terms of how the world relates to us. So, a lot of people who come to practice don't have a great relationship with ourselves when we start. And I think that's part of why it's pretty ripe ground for being targeted by people who are abusers of different kinds, because you're either, like, I often think of people who come to practice as like, I've tried everything else, it didn't really work, where it tends to be like the rebels and the miscreants, and like, you know those who didn't really fit in anywhere else, nothing else worked, or you were terribly like wounded by the regular world, quote unquote. So people come in and they don't have discernment because they haven't, or they're highly traumatized, they're highly fragmented, all of these things. So it's a slow process to cultivate that connection. So agency to me is built on connection, and whether that's like connecting to yourself or connecting to practice, connecting to a teacher, a guru, it's the ability to connect and like be in that space. And so I think naturally then out of that grows this ability to stand up for those basic human rights, and starting to see then in the world, like, oh, there's a lot of places where that's not being upheld at all. Different pockets of our culture, different genders, different sexuality, different skin color, the works. You start to see, and there's a way that when we start to look with really, eyes open in that way, it's overwhelming because there's a tremendous amount of just terrible shit that's going on out there, and people who aren't fair or just getting ahead in the world, and that makes no sense. And then people who are doing, all the good things, and they're still being preyed on and, like screwed by the system and all of that. So that's a much bigger answer to me for, I think, a journey that we're all on that happens in a variety of ways. And when I hear about somebody like Surya Das, who we have to sort of explain this a little bit. He was somebody who was accused of sexual misconduct with his students, and he's somebody who has a school in Cambridge, but is also part of the kind of Ram Dass community, and so it's stirred up a lot for different people. And I would say in the context for some of the other Me Too things that have come out in the past years, his was, you know, it wasn't in the media as much, and he didn't respond as much, and it was a much smaller story than some of the other ones that I've been witness to, which is not, just to like give a little context for people who have no idea what we're talking about with him.
Yeah, thank you. I realized I didn't do that. Thanks.
So yeah, I think as we practice more and more and we get in touch with, our basic human rights, then we have to decide for ourselves, like, what do we do when we encounter people who are, not doing good things in the world. And like we said before, I think someone who's like claiming to be a teacher, that there is like even a greater responsibility there, and that like those kinds of, like, the ignorance and malice that comes from someone like that is much more treacherous in a lot of ways because of the nature of spirituality. But I think it's so essential to learn how to use our voices for ourselves, to stand up for ourselves, and to stand up for people who don't yet have the ability to stand up for themselves. And that's like that agency, and that as we build this capacity to connect more and more and into the world and build these compassionate hearts, it's like it does mean that we play a part in the world and in the injustice in the world, and have to kind of answer this question of like, what are we going to do about that? What is right here? And that it doesn't really work at a certain point to just sit back and do your practice, because you're part of this puzzle. You have a role to play, and we're all going to play a little different role. Not everybody is in the role of like calling out the thing. Some are in the role of like forgiving and nurturing. Some are in the role of, it's like all these moving parts. So I did want to just say that in regard to that, because it's a very important topic.
Yeah, thank you. That was beautifully said, Lily.
So cultural appropriation.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, we'll
I'm
do a
just
short.
reading
We'll do a
that.
short. I mean, this term basically is like it does kind of come out of colonialism, and it's when like a dominant part of like a dominant group in society basically like adopts like customs, practices, ideas from the non-dominant culture and aspect of the culture, and doesn't credit it. It's just like you steal it, and a lot of times you kind of like it's like the classic like person in the meeting who like is either is not like a white male, a white straight male in the meeting who has some brilliant idea, and then the person who's at the top of the food chain takes the idea and uses it as their own. So yeah, I think part of waking up in this process and honoring ourselves is like, oh, I'm doing a practice that comes from somewhere else, and I can't just take that and like use it to better my life and not know anything about it, the context where it comes from, or like, you know, pick and choose like what I do with it. Especially when it comes to these like kind of more esoteric things. They live often in whole traditions and bodies of knowledge, and there's a lot of people who have worked really hard to maintain them and keep them true to their form so that they're not corrupted by the world and they can still serve the role that they're in. But it's tricky because like you and I have talked a lot about going to India. It's an extremely patriarchal society, but it also essentially still is a living caste system. And and even though here in the West, like I was born into a highly privileged place in society as like, you know, upper class white woman, even though there in India, like I was treated like a secondhand citizen, and that was an important experience for me to have, because so often we're just like in our little thing and we have no idea what it's like, especially if you have experienced a lot of privilege in your life. You just, how would you know what it's like to not be that way? So we discuss it a lot. You and I have discussed it a lot. I talk about it a lot. Anytime a friend of mine is like going to India for the first time, I'm like, okay, sit down. We got to talk about this, because there are aspects of that culture that I think are really out of date and damaging and broken, and that's part of the mix there. You can't just ignore that. And I think if you're going to kind of vet a practice and see like what does it do, like you have to look at the culture that it's from. So it's pretty tricky. I know for like when I wrote the book, it was just important to me to really ground it in Hindu culture. And part of that meant like really fleshing out research and just like giving credit where credit is due. Like I didn't make this up. This comes from here. And kind of the way like when you take a really good like sociology class or something, it's like you really learn about the context of where something's come from. And then you can just like understand it more fully. And so that's a little bit about how I think about cultural appropriation. But I also years ago, Krishna Das would talk about like the change in India from when he was there in the 70s. Like now all the kids are dressed in like jeans and have cell phones, and like then the westerners come over and they're like in Indian outfits and like kurtas and stuff, and they're just like laughing at us like they want
Yep.
western culture.
Yep.
All these like westerners wanted eastern culture. So it's all a little goofy. I think it's good to just think about it. There was a movement kind of, I think it was in the 2000s, like around the time that Coachella got popular, that was reclaim the bindi, which is like
Oh yeah.
the little decorative piece that you see here in Hindu culture, because it just became such a thing to wear one of those when you're at Coachella. And nobody has any idea where it came from or what it means. And so it's important to just educate yourself about, you know, oh, is this cool, or am I actually disrespecting a whole lineage of people in using this thing in this particular way?
That's actually a great that it's a really good answer, and it's really helpful to sort of clarify. I mean, it's helpful to me, so I imagine it's helpful to others. And I do want to say, like, I in the '90s when I first started going to Jivamukti, like we were all wearing bindis. It was like, yeah, like put on the jewelry, and it was part of our spiritual garb. Which
Mm-hmm.
when I actually got to India, I was like, oh, that's not right. That's not what
Yeah.
that is. like
Yeah.
we like nobody's like that has nothing to do with any, like it's not
Yeah.
it's not really what's done, or it's not part of the practice in a way that, like, you know sort of, there are cultural things that you do when you're in an ashram, like as a woman, even though you may, like, this is a whole nother conversation, but as a feminist, you might go like, I shouldn't have to cover up. But culturally, in an
Mm-hmm.
ashram in India, it's respectful to cover yourself. And so it's a line. But like that's a thing where, we were wearing
Yeah.
the dupatta, the scarf is
Yeah.
like the dupatta that covers you. And I have a funny story I want to tell, and then I want to switch over and ask people to I want to take some questions, but from the participants. But I will say I have a funny story about the dupatta, because as a woman, so you're wearing this scarf, right? It's
I
an
really
extra
hope you're
layer.
about to tell the story that I want you to tell.
Yeah, yeah. And so I have this friend, Raven, and so she really, really, really didn't want to wear this dupatta, which at
Yeah.
the ashram you're supposed to, right? It's part of your. So you wear this long, as a woman, you're wearing this long kind of top, which is pretty much a dress, which anybody in the
Yeah.
West would just be wearing that, like with nothing else. But no, and then you're wearing these pants, these big pants that have to cover your ankle, and you're wearing this scarf that is like an important part of the outfit, and it's heavy and it's big, and you can play with like fabric, but you still have to wear the thing, right? And you can play with how you wear it, and like different women have different hacks of how they wear it and deal with it, but you have to do it. And I had this friend Raven who like hated it more than anybody else. And every day we were in this ashram together. It was her first time in India, and I'd been there a while, and a few times. And every day, every single day, she would come up to me and she would go, "Do I really have to wear this?" And I would say, "Well, yes, you do." And then she would literally like stomp her foot and turn away and walk away from me. And like that was her react, and I get it. Like the thing is, I get it, but like you're asking me what's proper. Well, then wear the.
Yeah.
um,
Well, and I think like in the beginning we're so excited to put on something else because
Totally
like
excited.
we don't like ourselves. Like we're trying to get
Exactly.
away. So I think as we like settle into what practice really is and like start to get more okay, then it's like, okay, well, let's get out the jeans. It's fine.
Right. Right. It's
But I
fine to
think that,
dress as I do. It's fine to be
yeah,
me
yeah,
and to do it's like why Krishnadas never really dressed up in like he wears plaid shirts, like
right,
that was always I always really loved that about him in the beginning, that he didn't dress in the garb that so many people did.
yeah. I thought you were going to tell the story about how that scarfy caught on fire.
Oh, that story. Well, my okay, I'll tell that story and then we are going to take questions. Um
Yeah,
Uh, well,
that
my
was
yeah. Well,
quite
so
an
I'm
event.
wearing. We do 108 Hanuman Chalisas every New Year's Day, and we all gather. In the old days, we would gather in person. Remember those days? And we would
Those
all be in
days.
this room, and so we were all at Tibet House, and at the end we do the arati, which is the lighting of the flame, and like we have a little kind of lamp that we wave the flame over the.
And
Um,
we're all just like out of everything by that point because it's been 12 hours of just like practice. You've just been like cooking in it all day, so you're pretty out of it.
Yeah, we were like, you're pretty high, you're just
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
woo. For most of
yeah.
us, like those of us who really do it, we don't even really eat that day. Like we're not, we're just chanting all
Well,
day. We eat a little, but not a lot.
yeah, you. She doesn't eat very much. I'm eating
Anyway,
chocolate all day.
so but needless to say, we're in it. We are in it full on. And so this year actually there was a difference with the lamp that had the usually we would that had the flame. Usually what we did was we would put tea lights on a tray and use the tea lights and right. And mind you, the altar is covered in fabric. Like we have fabric everywhere, right? And we have candles all on the altar. So this year Nina wanted to do like the proper lamp, and so there was ghee, and I was the one doing the arti,
Yeah.
and I have this dupatta on, and which the dupatta saved me, I will say that, and the oil from the lamp was hot and dripping, and it started to drip on the fabric in front of me. So first a fire started like in front of me, and I'm like standing there. I don't even know what to do in this moment except try to stay steady. And then some people rush to put out that fire, but then before I know it, somebody's rushing at me and like
She went up in
tackling me. And
flames.
I went up in flames without knowing
Yeah,
it, my dupatta, and I was not even not anything on me, not a hair was like I don't know how
yeah.
that's possible, but not a hair. But so the dupatta did save me in the end. So I
And
do have some gratitude.
Arjun's water
Yeah,
also.
Arjun's water.
Yeah.
Um, so all right,
So should
so
we take some questions?
we should. So if you have questions, please post them in the chat. And I think what would be lovely is if Lily would read a little bit from her book.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So that gives us a little time if you want to think of your questions, and if you don't have questions, maybe maybe by then we'll be out of time anyway, or I can ask another 1,000.
Yeah. So I will say that sorry, I'm like my light comes in at this time of day. It's nothing to be done. I will say that this book it's really kind of a primer for chanting practice. And so there's like some Q&A, like questions about mantra practice at the back. I thought I would just to read a little bit there because we're in question mode now. So this question is, I don't feel anything when I do mantra practice. Am I doing it wrong? Definitely not. There will be times in your practice when you feel totally peaceful and zen, while moments will feel bored and dry, like nothing is happening. And of course, there'll be plenty of days that you are angry, sad, or disconnected. All of this is very normal, and it's important to understand that these different emotional states are not reflective of your abilities as a mantra practitioner. Emotions come and go and are not in our control. It's common to assume that if we feel good in a mantra session, it's because we're doing something right. And if we feel bad in a mantra session, it's because we're doing something wrong. Don't believe the hype. The real power of this practice is in the cultivation of deeper skills, concentration, resilience, and kindness below the surface. In other words, mantra practice is not about manufacturing a specific emotional state, but instead discovering new ways to relate to how we feel. Of course, you may choose to work with a mantra to invoke a specific quality in your life, but this is something that emerges naturally over time and not in the same exact practice session. So, a more accurate measure of whether or not you are understanding the spirit of the practice might be, can I be gentle with myself on days that I'm having a hard time? Can I draw on deeper focus on days that I'm extra scattered? Can I be patient with myself on days that the practice is boring? Can I be tender and let go without judging myself for feeling afraid? So that's a little tasty taste of the book. It's
Thank you.
also got a breakdown of half the book is mantras and like what they mean, and a whole other conversation that, well, we wanted to talk about it today, but was kind of working with like deities as archetypes, which is really fun, and talking about the goddess. So we'll have to do another sesh where we get into that stuff. But there's a lot of that in the book too.
Yeah, I was thinking like we need a part 2 with us.
Yeah.
So we'll have to schedule that. What? Let's see. I have one. I see a question from before I. Okay. Okay. Whoa. Okay. I see some questions. Okay. But they all just came in really fast. Thank you. Okay. So Jeanette asked. Well, actually, before I read Jeanette, I'm going to read your question, but I do want to read just Lincoln wrote something that I wanted to read. So scrolling a little about cultural appropriation. Lincoln just said re-chanting and appropriation. It can be commercialized. The tradition can be disrespected and abused, and for sure it can be misunderstood. But the Bhakti movement is a gift to all. The practice was liberated from the temples and offered to the people regardless of distinction. How is that appropriated? I think how is that appropriated in the West? That's actually a really good descriptor, Lincoln. Okay, so hold on. Okay. Jeanette asked, what is it like? I'm just taking these in order that I see them. What is it like for both of you to be women kirtanwalas? Please share your experience. Lily, you start.
I mean, it's like every other aspect of my life. I look on the wall, and most of the pictures are people that don't look like me. Most of my teachers are people who are not the same gender as me. And so, for a long time, that kind of, I think, has forced me to like take teachings with a pretty big grain of salt. I do think that when somebody is undertaking practice and they're starting from the dominant position in society, that it's a different journey than someone who's starting from the non-dominant position in society. Recently, I was on a podcast talking about my book, and the person interviewing me was from the dominant position in our society. And it was just really interesting because I think for me as a woman, where the majority of the feedback in my life has been that my opinion doesn't matter as much because of my gender, that I'm not as valuable, my time is not as valuable, the way that I have been forced to question myself because, I'm just not heard the way a man would be heard. I think there's a different kind of doubt that comes into play that really has to be healed in a way that is not the case for someone who is taught to question themselves. And I also say that, understanding that I still, in the hierarchy of privilege, I'm very, very high in that. And there's a lot of times that I hear a male teacher talking about expressing like confidence in themselves, or how they may or may not question themselves. That is simply not my experience because my conditioning has been so different as a woman. So, yeah, on that podcast, I it was actually in the preparation for the recording, and I was talking to this fellow, and I had to, for some reason, he wasn't really familiar with my teaching background, probably because I just don't like toot my horn very much. But I have taught for a long time, and I've been practicing since 1998, which is a long time. Um, and I had to tell him that he hadn't really researched me. And he said, "Well, that's something good for you to let go of." And I thought, yeah, no, not for me. Like the work, I think, for someone who's not coming from the most dominant place in the society is to reach a point of self value in a very different way, because that's intact for someone who's at the top of the food chain. So I don't. I don't think one person can be to blame. Like that's the system. And at a certain point, I no longer wanted to listen to male teachers because their experience was just very different from mine. And so that's why City Ma was really important for me to have that perspective, and really why I got into goddess practices so much, and why I needed a community of women, like the Ma Squad, as we coined it, which is like a kind of group of us who lead chanting, because like there was no infrastructure in place to support us, and all of the people who are famous and in the spotlight have a different point of view. So it was good to kind of bolster that with some similar perspective along the way. What do you think, Ambika? What's it like for you?
Well, I think I want to talk about a little bit about inclusion, because one of the things, and it's funny because actually I remember, and I've always noticed this, but even in India too, right? Like when the women are singing, they always invite us in. They always invite us to sing with them, to lead, right? Always, right? And here I've had a similar experience. When women are leading kirtan, they often invite others in, invite me in and others. And in India, in the temples where the men, especially the men in power, the Brahmin men, they're not inviting you in. They're not. They're not.
Yeah.
And they're not, and they're belittling you. They're like, you're like an idiot. You're
Yeah.
just like nothing. And I feel like sometimes it's that way too here. Like I definitely have been dismissed and belittled and not taken seriously. And I am just grateful for my women, the women satsang, and the women who have kept chanting and kept doing the practice and have kept inviting us all in, have kept including. Like Lily has always been including us. Nina includes us. Like there's just this way in which I am really grateful for those women who keep chanting, and I'm cognizant of wanting to include others too, because it's just a different way of experiencing, right? It's not about, the chanting isn't about me and my personality, right? It's a practice to be shared. It's a practice to be shared. And it's not that there aren't men who include others in, but it's a general sort of thing. And then I also want to say, like, I'm super grateful for Siddhi, because she always made me feel, and everybody feels like important, whether you were a man or a woman, and she asked me to sing all the time, and she asked me to lead things when men would have been like, no way, like get out. But if
Yeah.
she said you do it, then they let you do it, right?
Yeah.
So
Well, and it really sent, I mean, like my first trip to India was for Durga Puja in Kenchi, and the only time there was like a certain time at night that the women were allowed to sing, and that's a pretty strong message of value from their culture and context, and
oh yeah,
how different it feels in terms of giving ourselves permission to even engage in certain things when we don't see it modeled from anyone that is like us or has been through what we've been through or whatnot, let alone, I mean, their racism is really the caste system, but you know, I'm also just like hyper aware of how like white upper class the spiritual community is in the
Oh yeah.
West, and that was like the impetus for having a donation based yoga center for so long was accessibility, because it ultimately really does come down to finances. But even with that, it's very hard to go against the stream of how the whole system is set up. And so that's another conversation, but I think it's good to start talking about it.
Yeah, no, it's great. So I'm cognizant of time, and I want to read at least one more question
Yep.
here, and then what we'll do is Lily's going to chant at the end. So if we'll go a little late, but and so please stick with us if you want to, because we love having you here.
Stay as
Um,
long as you want.
so let's see. Sharon Goldman, thank you so much for talking on these topics. How do you recommend we navigate the line between spiritual bypassing through chant versus experiencing healing in our heart and opening space to be more compassionate where we couldn't before due to wounds? Wow,
Yeah.
that's quite a question. That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
That's a great question,
Yeah, it is.
because I think it really speaks to like the process, which is like we grow and we come to realize the places, you know, where before there were shadows, and what is the process like to kind of bring them into the light, and I think hold that in a good way, because we're always doing that work. We're always I think one place to kind of look at that is looking at inherent bias, and that's kind of one of the things that came out of the amazing Black Lives Matter movement this past year, because it kind of gets down to like the basic programming of the mind, and really understanding the nature of mind and the nature of bias and the way our minds organize things, and that I think we can kind of start to tackle some of those topics that are smaller things, you know, that we can slowly kind of work with. But there's a real truth in that, like, you know, I think we're all aware of behavior we used to enact that's we now realize like, well, that really wasn't cool, or things we said or
Mm.
how we were. And I don't think we start with like the biggest thing, like like the most egregious thing we remember doing, or like maybe we slowly have realizations, but like start small with little ways. And I think learning how to hold those things compassionately can kind of come slowly, and we can kind of come to like trust the process a little bit, instead of like remembering like the worst thing we've ever done and trying to forgive ourselves for that. And I do think forgiveness is a really important aspect of growth, of
Yeah.
letting ourselves really be okay with like, we did the best we can, and there's some room for growth, and kind of understanding like what provides good growth. Is it positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement? And we get to use a little science to back us that like it's actually positive reinforcement that helps us to learn. So I think we can like gradually, you know, kind of grow some confidence in our ability to forgive our blind spots, to forgive the times we've you know, acted out in fear or in our wounds and hurt people we love. And, you know, we take responsibility, we apologize, we make amends, we educate ourselves, and commit to doing better. And so it's a good journey. It's an important journey.
Yeah, and I just want to say to that, and I want to read one more question here that I saw that I love, but um, that I think just you asking the question is important, you know, like this reflection and being able to question yourself is a really great, like just this talking about it, reflecting on it, questioning yourself is a really important part of the process. So there's a question here from Will. Maharaji and Sri Siddhima didn't commonly give formal teachings, but in addition to singing the Chalisa, what direction, insight did Mataji share with you? Which spiritual principles did she practice? Which qualities did she exude? And what is your understanding of how these saints and siddhas changed hearts? Wow, that's a really big question.
That's a book, is what
Yeah,
that
that's a book.
is.
But I do want to I'll answer some of it briefly, and then maybe we have to move on into some chanting. But uh, for Siddhima was always prayerful. She was always in prayer. She was always constantly practicing. She was always connected to the divine. For her, everything was Maharaji, and she was never apart from him in her mind, in her spirit. There was nothing she did that wasn't in complete service to what she believed that he was, which was, you know, love itself, the divine, right? And so she was very one pointed, and she exuded an immense amount of love, unconditional love. Like that was just to be in her presence. I felt loved in a way and seen in a way that I had never felt in front of anybody else. And I wasn't the only one who felt that way, right? She made us all feel that way. Um, and she was loving and nurturing and also very powerful and strong. So she really modeled that for me, really what it means to be like a practitioner as a woman, right? And how you can be soft and strong, right? How those qualities, right? And so, and it was never, ever, ever even a little bit about her. Nothing. She wanted nothing to be about her. And yet she was super strong and powerful. So that was like an incredible space to be in. And did she share with us other than she gave us other chants to do, like the Bajrang Ban? She started to really ask me to do Bajrang Ban and a bunch of us a lot. And then, you know, she would ask us to do the prayers we did at the temple. And that there wasn't that much practice she asked us to do, and it was very individual, as it was with Maharaji,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it was really like per person. Like, so for instance, I was given like a whole bunch of instructions and a lot of prayers to do and very precise, right, ways to do these things from her at different times, right? Different things at different times. And in answer to my, you know, constant running to her with problems. And so, but like my husband at the time, John, when we were there together, you know, she told him he only to do one Chalisa, only one Hanuman Chalisa a day. I had to do 11. And I had all these other things that went with it. And hey, all she said to him was, try to remain upright. Try to remain upright. Not even you need to sit up, kiddo, but like just try.
So good.
So it was really individual in that way, you know. So do you want to say anything, Lily, to that and add anything?
I mean, I think that a lot of the vibe was like so practical, like the way a grandparent kind of functions in a in a household in the West. And you'd see that a lot with like the Indian devotees. Like their questions were very life oriented, and a lot of the kind of the Western devotees who would go a lot, it wasn't like how many chalices should I do. It was like, should I go back to college? Should I stay in my apartment? I'm looking at this apartment over here. How does that sound? It's like really practical. So
Really?
very individual, and I think that like the the core thread that was like running through so much of the directions around practice and then regular life had to do with being of service and finding a way to be of service, whether your mode of service was overt, like volunteering in a soup kitchen, or making your art, or whatever it might look like, but making your whole life be a prayer, and that it wasn't just like, okay, we're doing this one thing on the mat and then the other 23 and a half hours a day are just something else, but that it was very, very integrated in that way. So I think for those who want someone to just tell them what to do so that your life is better and you're less miserable, like you kind of got to wing it and just like make your life a prayer and do those things large and small to like help people when you can be of help. And it's just that simple. There's not like one right way to do it. And I think the way you particularly embody it is going to be your beautiful, unique combo of how that feels right for you.
So I lied when I said that was the last question because we really have to
Great.
do this one because this is from Jackie Brown.
Jackie
Jackie
Brown!
Brown.
Oh
So
my
we have
God.
to do that. So Jackie asked, I hope you're still with us, Jackie.
I
And then
hope.
on the feed or the
Yeah.
live stream, whatever the
Yeah,
hell
yeah.
this is. Um,
It's a live stream. We're
it's
on
a
a
live
live
stream.
stream.
Thank you. We're on a live stream. I was like, we're on a Zoom. We're not on Zoom. Anyway,
Uh-huh.
we're on a live stream. Thank you for this convo. Miss you both. We miss you too, Jackie. Question: how are you both thinking about kirtan in this Zoom virtual world? Technical, energetic, connection challenges. Oh my God. I just had to.
Yeah,
All
we
right.
hate
Yeah.
it. It's
Yeah.
shitty.
Yeah.
I, I mean, okay, I will say that like my practice idea at home is distinct from leading chanting with a group of people. So like my core thing is exactly the same. But yeah, it sucks to not be able to get together. And doing it on Zoom is like nowhere near the same thing. Like anybody who says otherwise is just like full of shit. It's very hard to connect through the airways. And a lot of, for me, what happens like being in a room with people is like feeling the energy in the room and like what uniquely happens in a certain group of people that's always different depending on how everybody's day was. And you can't read that across the airwaves at all. So yeah, it's just a different version of it. And I think things that are missing that are a bummer. And also, there's an intimacy that's here that's like, I'm right with you in a way that doesn't happen in normal times. So there's like pros and cons. And I think it's all going to feel so different when we can get together in person because we've had to go without it for quite some time. And there's going to be a very different level of just appreciation for like what can transpire in a group of people, whether you're chanting or watching a movie together or, having some vegan barbecue, whatever. What do you think, Ambika? We talk a
Well,
lot about how much we hate it, by the way.
yeah, we do. We talk all the time. And I actually
Yeah.
want to just tell the story of like we did when we did it was we did Maha Mantra for, was it Guru Purnima, Lily, that we did it? Anyway,
Yeah.
we did this all day chanting in July, right? It was
Yeah.
Guru Purnima. And, we'd been on lockdown for a little while then. And I literally, like, after I got done chanting to my phone again, I just started bawling. Like,
Yeah.
I was like, I can't even stand this
Oh, it's
anymore.
tough.
Like, I am just like, it's like for a long time, I felt like a real physical pain, like an ache from missing the satsang and the community um, of that chanting has brought to my life and to our
Yeah.
lives. So I still miss it. But I will say over time, uh, I've certainly gotten used to it. Like we've gotten used to so much of life in the pandemic, right? Um, but also there have been things that have come from it, like these conversations. We never did this when we were all chanting together in person. Like we never had this kind of a conversation before. And so one of the great things for me to come out of this is these conversations and realizing like there's a real need for this. Um, and we're going to continue having them right here on the Brooklyn Kirtan Collective page. And so that's a nice thing that's come out. And there is like this, I started to over time, like I started to treat it differently. Like it's not the same as kirtaning together and chanting together by any stretch. And if you asked me which I would prefer, without a doubt, I prefer chanting together. There's no, like, there's
Yeah.
no question.
Yeah.
But I have gotten better at, um, sort of what Lily was saying, like that intimacy, like when you guys are commenting in the chat, like there can be this really lovely back and forth in this platform that helps keep the
Yeah.
energy and the vibration and the feeling of being together going. So um, that's my response. So
Yeah.
we've had so many beautiful comments here, and thank you all. And so before Lily's going to chant, but before she does, I just want to make a couple of announcements. So
While you do that, I'm gonna fix my lighting.
fix your lighting,
Yeah.
girl. You're all slatted. Um, so I will say that I have my latest single is Ubi Caritas, which is out now in all the places, and you can get it on Bandcamp, and that's where if you buy it on Bandcamp, I get more of the money, and then I'm donating 50% to Cathedral Community Cares, which they feed people, they clothe people, they do wonderful work in the community locally, supporting people who are in need. And then also, I wanted to mention. And then my website is there, ambikachant.com. And then I also wanted to talk about, usually we offer up some place to do donations, to give donations rather than giving us donations because people want to donate to the kirtan. So tonight, it's the Houston Food Bank. I'd like to give it up. And I think if Janaki, if you're out there, you can post that in the chat.
Are you out there, Jonathan?
Janiki's out there. And I want to just thank also Anna in the background running this whole fabulous thing. And that Lily, we're trying out this new platform. So Lily and I it's nice because we can see each other and you can see us together, which is kind of a nice new thing. I think that, and we're back in a month. We're going to go, we're going to be back here in 1 month from tonight, March 28th, with Nina. I'll be talking to Nina Rao. So that's what we're doing next month. That's the conversation, and I'll keep them going once a month on a Sunday on this page and all the places. And thank you, Lily, because we could just keep going, but
Yeah, we can keep going.
it's really great.
But
I love it.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're doing this, and I think it's going to be really fun to see kind of how it evolves with your different guests and all of that. So maybe also people, if there's like certain things you want to hear discussed, you can like send a message to Ambika about different topics you would like her to cover and things that you feel aren't getting talked about enough, all that good stuff.
Yeah, thank you. Great suggestion. So now Lily's going to chant so we can close out and
thank you again to Anna, who is the maven, the live stream maven, for running this for us today, and Janaki for supporting with comments and questions and all that. And, this has been a brutal period of time where we're so limited on the resources that we normally have to support a balanced way of being in the world. And I know a lot of folks are really just so deeply fatigued from how long it's been. It's kind of like everyone was like holding their breath, waiting for it to be over. And it's not over, and we're needing to breathe again. So it's a time to really call on all of the tools that we have to really keep working hard to keep our well-being taken care of in this complicated life that doesn't always make a lot of sense. And so even if it's just a matter of being a little less afraid or a little less anxious or a little more connected, we'll keep coming back to the prayers and the chants and the mantras. So I'm going to do a Devi Pranam, and then we'll do a Hanuman Chalisa. This first one I learned from Nina Rao, and there's a beautiful version of it on her second album. Om Durgam Shivam Shantikarim Brahmanim Brahmana Priyam Sarvaloka Pranetrincha Pranamami Sada Shivam Mangalam Shobhanam Shuddham Nishkalam Paramangalam Vishveshwarim Vishwamatam Chanikam Pranamam Ya Devi, Ya Devi, Ambedukaharani, Ya Devi, Ya Devi, Ambedukaharani. Sarva Deva Mahim Devim Sarva Roga Bhayapaham Brahmesha Vishnu Namitam Pranamami Sada Shivam Vindyastam Vindya Nilayam Divyastana Nivasham Yoginim Yoga Jananim Chandikam Pranamam Yaham Ya Devi, Ya Devi, Ambedukaharani, Ya Devi, Ishvarim Ishvara Priyam Pranatosmi Sada Durgam Samsara Navatarani Om Durgam Shivam Shantikarim Brahmanim Brahmana Priyam Sarvaloka Prane Trihincha Pranamami Sada Shivam Ya Devi Ya Devi Mangalamurati Marutamandana Sakala Mangalamulani Kanda Mangalamurati Marutanandana Sakala Mangalamulani Kanda Shri Guru Charana Saroja Raja Nijamana Mukuru Sudari Varanao Raghubara Bimala Jasu Jodaya Kupalachari Buddhihinu Tanu Janike Sumerom Pavana Kumar Bala Buddhi Vijaya Dehu Mohi Harahu Kalesha Vikarasya Vara Ramachandra Varaje Sharanam Jaya Hanuman Gyana Guna Sagar Jaya Kapishati Loka Ujaga Ramaduta Tulita Baladam Anjani Putra Pavana Sutanama Mahavira Bikaram Bajarangi Gumati Nivara Sumati Kesangi Kanjana Varana Viraja Subesa Kanana Kundala Kunjita Kesa Hatha Vajora Dvaja Viraja Kande Muji Jine Usaji Shankara Suvana Kesari Nandana Teja Pratapa Mahajagabana Vidyavana Guniyat Chatur Ramakaja Karibe Koratu Prabhu Charitra Sunibe Korasya Rama Lakana Sita Manabasya Sukshma Rupa Darisya Hindikava Vikata Rupa Dari Lanka Jarava Bhima Rupa Dari Asara Sanhare Ramachandra Ke Kaja Samvare Laye Sajivana Lakana Jiyai Shri Raghubira Harshiyara Lai Raghupati Kini Bhata Barai Tuma Mama Priya Bharatai Samabai Sahasabadana Tumaro Jasagawa Asakai Shri Pati Kanta Lagawa Sanakadika Brahmadi Munisa Narada Sharada Sahita Isa Yamakubera Digapala Jahante Kabiko Bedika Isake Kahante Tuma Upakara Sugriva Hikina Rama Malaya Raja Padadina Tumero Mantra Vibhishana Mana Lankeshwara Bhai Sabha Jagajana Yuga Sahasra Yojana Parabhanu Lilyota Madura Palajana Prabhu Mudrika Mele Mukamahi Jaladi Langi kechete sugamana uagraha tumare tete Rama duare tumara koare otanagya binu pesare sab sukala hai tumare sharana tumara kshaka kahu ko darana apan tej samaro ape tino loka hankatenkape bhuta pisajana katanahiyave mahabira jabanam sunam nase roga hare savapir japata nirantara anumatabira sankatatena anumana churave manakrama bachana jana jolave sab par rama tapasvi raja tinake kaja sakala tumasaja or manorath jo koilave soya amita jeevana palapava charon yuga partapa tumara e parsiddha jagat ujiyara sadhu santa ke tumara kaware asarani kandana rama dulare ashta siddhi navnidhi ke data asabar dina janaki mata rama rasayana tumare paas sadar ho raghupati ke das tumare bhajan ram ji gopal janam janam ke dukh bisarave ant kala raghupar pur jaye jahan janma hare bhakt kahaye और देवता चित्त न डरहि हनुमत से सर्व सुख करहि संकट कटे मिटे सब पीर जो सुमेरे हनुमत बलबीर जय 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 हनुमान गोसाई कृपा करौ गुरुदेव की नाई जो सत बार पाठ कर कोई चूत ही बंदे महासुख हो जोया परे हनुमान चालीस होया सिद्धि सकी गौरीस तुलसी दास सदा चर की जय नाथ हृदय महादेव पवन तनय संकट हरना मंगल मूर्ति रूपा Rama Lakshmana Sita Sahita Hridaya Vasau Surabhupa Siyava Ramachandra Parijaya Sharanam Sita Ram Jai Sita Ram 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 Sita Ram Jai Sita Sita Ram Jai Sita Ram Sita Ram Jai Sita Ram Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram So as always we send out the merit of our practice, all of the positive energy that we've generated here, and we dedicate it to all beings everywhere, so that not only are we benefiting from it, but that all those, especially those who don't have the privilege that we do of even being able to do a practice like this, can also find the freedom that we seek. So may we all be happy and healthy and that no matter what comes to us in life, we can stay connected to our own being, that again and again we return to that deepest aspect of ourselves, that we can come home again.
Thank you. That was really beautiful, Lily. And this was really great. And so thanks for joining me and,
Yeah.
you know,
And
getting
like,
into it.
I hope everybody starts having these kind of conversations with their friends because they're so juicy, and we
Yeah.
all have, you know, I think you and I have, we're so much better for like really diving into these things and talking about them, and, you know, just really helping each other find greater clarity. And everybody can do that with their friends. So let's do it.
Yes. All people having these conversations. I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Buddy up. Buddy up, everybody.
Buddy up. Buddy up.
And so we're Brooklyn Kirtan Collective. We have kirtans every Friday, and now I've added these monthly talks and chanting. So come back and
Come
thank you.
back.
And Lily, you'll come back in many
Oh, yeah.
on Fridays and in another chat talk.
In all the ways. In all the ways.
Okay.
Okay.
Be well, everyone. Be good to each other. Be good to yourselves. Ram Ram.